if we don't have those personal connections, we can demonize each other. And so I think associations can play a very important role in helping people relate to each other. It provides a forum for, I think, Chinese buyers to be able to understand the Canadian producers and what they're like. Desire to come and visit Canada to go see where the product is grown, what it looks like, is huge.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of Fireside Chats with Erin. I'm your host, Erin Gowerluck. As the executive director of the Grain Growers of Canada, I started this podcast to serve as a forum for real conversations with industry influencers and policymakers. Today's episode marks the second in a series of conversations with ag sector visionaries. We could all use a little inspiration as we say goodbye to what was a very challenging year and consider the possibilities that a new year could bring. I'm very excited to welcome today's guest, an ag sector visionary, Canada's ambassador to the People's Republic of China, Dominic Barton. Ambassador Barton was appointed to his current role by the Right Honourable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on September 4th, 2019. Ambassador Barton is former managing partner at the international consulting firm McKinsey & Co., where he provided strategic advice to national leaders, government, and corporations. Ambassador Barton, thank you for stopping by for a fireside chat. It's an honor to meet you.
It's an honor to meet you and to be part of this podcast series. So thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Let's dive right in, shall we?
Excellent.
The role of Canada's ambassador to China is, I can imagine, challenging and complex at the best of times. Add recent diplomatic tensions and a global pandemic to the mix, and I can only imagine how demanding this role must have been for you. A year and a half into this posting, tell us a bit what some of your most significant priorities have been.
Well, thank you, Erin. Yes, as you know, too, I wasn't trained as a diplomat. So as my wife says, you know, he was appointed an ambassador. Time will tell whether he has any diplomatic skills. But as you said, it's been a very challenging period, right? Both in terms of our bilateral relationship, and that's one of the main reason I was keen to try and do whatever I could to help, but also in terms of what's been happening in the world. And so what I and we are focused on here in China in our mission is really 5 priorities. That's what we've set, because there's so many changes and shifts going on. I think it's important still to keep a set of priorities above and beyond all the swirl. And if you don't mind, I'll just dig into that just quickly. What those 5 are. You know, but the first is to secure the release of our 2 Michaels and get clemency for Robert Schellenberg. That's core. Obviously, Madam Meng's situation is related, we believe, to that. But we've got that is at the core of the bilateral challenge from 2018. We've got to resolve that, and so there's a lot of effort underway to do that. The second is that, you know, as Canada, even though we have this bilateral challenge, we have to continue to stand up for our values and our rights and human rights. And so that there's been a lot happening out here on that front, whether it be in Hong Kong or Xinjiang. But we've got it. We have to be consistent, and we have to be loud on those, and we continue to do that. And that doesn't help with the relationship, but I think it's what people expect from Canada. So we do that broadly and narrowly out here. The third is actually around the trade and investment side, and this is where, particularly on the grain grower side, I'm so excited to be talking with you, because you know, China is an incredibly important market. Whether you like China or don't like China, you think China is good or bad, and I think there's a bit of both in it. It is an extremely important and sizable market, which we can come to later. And we've tried to do is say we're going to continue to support Canadian businesses in their exports and their domestic activities in China, as we have, and we'll continue to do that. But we've also sort of set 5 priority sectors that we want to drive, which fit some of the work we did with the Growth Council before, and very much at the top of that list is ag food. because there is a tremendous opportunity for our Canadian producers and farmers in this country. And so we have a very intense effort around that. And I'm glad actually to see that our exports actually to China have gone up about 8.1% last year, while it dropped globally close to 12%. So it's remained actually a resilient market even during the pandemic. But trade and investment is important. We have to engage. I talked about some of the challenging aspects of what we have to do, but we also can cooperate in some areas. And then the latter two priorities are really around building for the medium and long term. China is going to be a very, very important country for decades, I would argue hundreds of years to come, just given its scale, given its history, and so forth. And so the fourth priority is around really deepening the people-to-people ties, the fabric between our countries, because while we have a G to G set of tensions and bilateral challenges, that doesn't mean we can't have strong people-to-people ties. And we see that in universities with students. We see that on sports. We see it in culture. We see it at the provincial level. We just signed a sister province relationship between Nova Scotia and Fujian province just before Christmas. So there's lots that can be done at that level. So we want to really forge that deeper so that we have, and what we're saying is there's probably 750 critical relationships we need to have as a country. And institutionally as a country, I'm going to go, there'll be other ambassadors, there'll be other people coming through. We've got to be building those deep relationships with the critical people over time, because then we can handle crises, short-term crises like we have, or other issues that pop up. And the final element is fifth priority, which again relates more to the medium and long term. I'm very keen that we have the best China desk in the G7. And what I mean by that is the capabilities, the expertise, the resources to be able to deal with China, much like we have built with the United States. I would argue that Canada has the best US desk, and that's not surprising because we've been living beside the US since we've existed. And I think we need the same thing with China. And I don't think any G7 country has a good desk, if you will. And so we've really got to build that. And that's not just the government, it's the think tanks, it's the associations such as yourselves, it's private sector, it's universities, but we've really got to build this because this is the future of the world. We're going to be, again, dealing with China. Again, there's many good aspects, there's many challenging aspects, but we have to have that. So sorry, that's a bit long-winded, but those are the 5 things that we try and drive to keep us focused while everything else is going on. It could be trying to secure PPE, it could be evacuating people out. There's always issues that are going on, but that's key.
So we're going to talk a lot more about China, and I am going to ask you about a role for associations like ours. But let's talk first a bit about your role with the Advisory Council. I don't know if you know how frequently your name is referenced in ag sector circles. As the chair of the Advisory Council for Economic Growth, we regularly point to the comprehensive recommendations from what we call the Barton Report as keys to unlocking our sector's economic potential. We're of the view that there's never been a more important time to ensure that Canada's agriculture sector is well positioned to help drive the post-pandemic economic recovery. So if you wouldn't mind, reflect for a moment on the work that you led in 2017, the vision that you held for the sector, and what that means 4 years later now when the country is recovering from this pandemic.
Well, thanks, Erin, because that the recommendations around agriculture and ag food were an extremely important part of that Growth Council work, which we were all excited about. And as you know, what we were looking to do was how do we raise the median income of Canadians substantially by 2030. That was kind of the mission, and it had to be a jolt to the system. And we didn't want to have 500 recommendations. We've seen this in other reports that you can get lost in the details. So we just wanted to have a dozen and then release them in waves. And I think that actually one of them, all of them have actually been implemented. But the one that I'm actually most proud about, and I'm not just saying that 'cause I'm with you, is actually on the sector, unleashing the sectors with, again, agriculture at the top of that list. And I think what we've said is that we're not a large country. We're, a country of roughly 40 million people. It's very difficult to be excellent in a world that demands that because of the competitiveness in 25 different areas. We've got lots of capabilities, but we need to focus and look at those sectors which have potential. I would call it tailwind forces. There's overall demand, right, that is very strong. There's a capability that we inherently have, some natural competitive advantages in where we are. And there's a pathway where we can be, if I might say, dominant in the world. And when we looked at, we looked very methodically, right? There was no buy, it was just looked at it. And agriculture just stood out in a very big way. One, the world, we've seen the numbers on this, but the demand for food, increasing by over 50% over the next 30 years with this massive middle class that's growing in Asia in particular because of urbanization that is going on. So that's a huge tailwind. Like I challenge another sector to have that kind, there's a lot in technology that will enable things, but just in terms of raw demand for high nutrition, high standard food, there's a very big tailwind. And then you look at us in terms of our inherent capability, we've got the land, we've got the water, which is increasingly critical when a lot of what I would argue, the bread baskets of the world are diminishing in water, like Australia, for example, and the United States. We are one of the 3 regions of the world that's got water, which is, I think, the new gold, if you will, and it's critical. But more importantly, we've got the talent, and we've got the universities. We've got world-class research. We've got amazing entrepreneurs. So we have the ingredient. And by the way, the other thing we noticed, which was again a surprise to me, was agriculture actually already accounts for a lot of employment in Canada. 2.1 million Canadians at the time, 6.7% of GDP. It already was an important sector. But I actually don't think it gets the respect it deserves. That's what also got my juices flowing, if you will. So we've got this huge set of tailwinds. I could go on about the demand for it. We've got these capabilities, but actually then when you look at our performance in terms of as a competitor, we're way under punching what we do, right? And this is where we pointed out the Netherlands. This also got me fired up. Netherlands, which is we could fit into the Greater Toronto area. I'm probably exaggerating, but 4% of Canada's land mass, and they're the number 2 exporter in the world, and we're down that list. And how can they do? That's just crazy. I mean, so I just think that to me, it's a call to action for the country. There's going to be really high value, important jobs. This is, people have, I think, very misconstrued ideas about the type of jobs in agriculture. Like it's hard labor. It's very hard work and where people is. And I don't discount the hard work side of it, but I actually think it's some of the most advanced tech jobs that we'll see. It's high value added. And then we have this Canadian brand where you put that on our product because of the history of how we've produced our food, and you have all the ingredients to be global champions. So that, again, I hope I'm not diving too much into the detail, but it was seen and is still very much seen as a critical linchpin to the Growth Council work of unleashing growth and improving median incomes for Canadians across the country. Because every region in Canada has agriculture. In my view, has to have agriculture, and now we're on the way, right? And we've got to. I will be very, very disappointed if we aren't the leaders. In 10 years from now, and we look back, Canada, we better be the dominant player, and that's what I'm keen to do anything I can to help in any way. Now in China, it's sort of I want to get our product to that growing middle class in China.
So let's talk briefly about that progress piece. in terms of the report and its recommendations. I think it was last week, Canada's Ag Day, when you gave a presentation and you talked, I think you gave us a grade of a B plus in terms of
Yeah.
how we were faring with respect to the recommendations. What more do you think we need to be doing if we want to get an A plus, for example, and in turn better position those high potential sectors to really drive this post-pandemic recovery?
Yeah, I think I was saying it was a B, because I think there has been, if I look at, I think the industry overall, I'm being very impressed of how it's performed during the pandemic. I mean, this could have been crippling, and I think it's a testimony again to the high standards that are set, the disciplines that are in place, and I've seen that with the consumers on this side who really respect the standards by which Canada operates and how the production works. And so I think that there's a lot of very good initiatives that are in place. I'm very excited about the protein supercluster. I'm excited about what's happening on the ocean supercluster, which a lot of that's related also to seafood and other product, agricultural related product on that side. The universities, the research that is being intensified to help, and the technology changes that are going on, and the startups. I mean, it's amazing to see the technology startups in agriculture, and we have seen an increase in our exports. Right, we've seen a movement on that side. I think in a very tough market. So that's where I feel like there's momentum. Where I feel the gaps are, if you will, is we need to ensure that we're going to have we have to have significant Canadian companies to be able to be the global champions. You can't be the lead in a sector and not have 3 to 5 of the companies be in the top 10 in that sector. And we're moving. We've got some excellent, some super Canadian companies, but we need to be actively thinking about how we dominate that. And that's thinking not only in terms of Canada, but more globally, more broadly. The second is moving up the food chain, so to speak, right? It's sort of on the value added side of things. I think again, we have I think we're at a time when you think especially about vegetable based proteins and what's happening on that side, there is a ton, I think, of opportunity. To me, it reminds me of what I think Minneapolis looked like 120 years ago. And you think about the brands that were created, Kellogg's, General Mills. There were some very significant companies that were born out of that period, and I think that's going to happen again in areas like vegetable-based proteins. But that it's very important that we have consumer ready brands that are there. And I think there's more we can do with ingredients. For example, I'm a fan of what Kim McConnell's been pushing on that side. We should be the ingredients champion, and then people can put it together in their various different ways. The third is the market access. We have to, and this is again very much related to China, but also to other parts of Asia, Southeast Asia in particular. We have to think about our diversity of the buyers that we go to. So, for example, in China, I think we should not think about China as a country. It's really 22 regions, or they think about it as 19. I think there's 22 regions, and people buy differently. There's a different structure of how the market works in those regions, and we shouldn't just focus on the classic three, which are Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. So it's thinking about a broader, deeper set of trade relationships in particularly in Asia, where we're going to have most of that middle class growth, but also in Europe. And I do think we even have to think about Africa. What is it that Canadian companies do in helping build agriculture? We can have an ownership position. It may be their land, it may be their water and what they do, but it's our capability and technology. And so I think we have to think much more globally on that side and where it is. So I think we have momentum. We have to also though make sure we have the infrastructure to be able to get our product to these markets. So thinking about the rail capacity, thinking about the port infrastructure. I think there's a lot more we need to do if we really are going to move from depends on the category, from eighth to first, or eighth, we're saying eighth to second, and fifth to second, in different categories. We're gonna have to have the capacity, so we better build that out. So you can see a range of things I think we have to do. We've got momentum, but let's really lean into this, and make sure that we're in all of the critical markets. Our brand is known, and we're more up the chain in terms of the value added side of things, whether it be the ingredients or the actual end product itself that's being bought.
So let's talk for a moment about that, how we get there, how we move from fifth to second, how we reach that goal of $75 billion in agri-food exports by 2025. Can we do that without China?
I don't believe we can. I think we have to have China. I mean, I think it's, I honestly believe people who think that have their head in the sand, because it's just, this isn't the Dominican Republic. This is with all respect to the Dominican Republic, this is a 1.4 billion people. It's going to have the single largest middle class. Its retail sales in 2019, just retail sales of goods, not services, was $5.3 trillion in 2019. In the US, it was 5.5. And those are absolute. They're not purchasing power parity or it's just absolute. It's viewed that in 2020, we don't have the data yet, that China will have surpassed the US. To put it in perspective, they're talking about 5.3 and 5.5 trillion. For Canada, that's 470 billion, right? So we're less than 10% of that. And it's growing rapidly, here in where it is. And the other thing is, people here in China, the bias for high quality, high standards is higher than in other markets because of problems that they've had in the past, where people have not been able to trust some of the local players. And there's been some very sad stories on that. So there's a very high demand for quality, and Canada just stands out on that side. Not to mention that we have a long-term relationship despite the bilaterals. You think about wheat sales, right? That just what you guys are doing. The wheat sales in the early 60s, that is something that people are taught in their Chinese history here in China, right? About how Canada had stepped in and had done that. So this is too important of a market. And what I would argue is that, and for those that may challenge it too, we should look at what other countries are doing. If I look at the United States, and the last 4 years has been a pretty rough period in terms of the relationship between the United States and China. Well, the American businesses didn't seem to get the memo from President Trump, because their sales and investments are at record high. The U.S. companies are getting about $600 billion in revenues from China. The Europeans just signed in December, a new investment treaty with China, because they're going to trade. They have to trade and participate. Look at what Germany and France are doing. So I think it's very, very important for our agriculture that we're here. We have to recognize we need to be resilient. We've got to think about diversity. This is where I think how do we get more diversity and resilience within China? I think we have to think about the region. It shouldn't just be China. There's other markets as well here. So we don't have all of our eggs in one basket. But I don't see how we can hit our ambition, certainly in being a global leader, if we're not doing more here in China.
Okay. Over the last few years, we've seen a growing trend of countries using sanitary and phytosanitary measures to restrict trade. Even with trade deals in place, we continue to face challenges with many of our trading partners. As nations now grapple with food security through the pandemic, there also seems to be now a growing sense of protectionism. As an exporting nation, you know that Canada relies on a rules-based trading system and needs those exports to help drive the Canadian economy. How concerned should we be about this trend towards protectionism, and how can we encourage a greater recognition of global rules-based trade?
I think this is a really important line of questioning, Erin, because I think that, while the trade is absolutely important, we have to increase our exports and so forth. And we need, as a small country with a huge amount of high quality resources, we need a strong multilateral system. So I think a strong WTO, and I'm very encouraged by, recent moves on the U.S. side that were, and the appointment of the new director in the WTO, that's going to be critical. But you raise a really important point on the phytosanitary measures, because this gets to the uh, tariff barriers, which are the most, I think, concerning, if you will, because it's hard to dig at it, if you know what I mean. And you get all sorts of, and the Australians are feeling this big time, right? It's sort of the whether it be, all sorts of accusations about what's in the grain or the dockage or there's just all sorts of different things that can be put through. And those non-tariff barriers are uh, very difficult to challenge because they take time to be able to work through. It's a process to take someone to the WTO if you have to go through it. It's if people have, you have product on the sea, and then you have all of a sudden you're not going to be allowed permission, that puts a lot of people at risk, those farmers who've put and producers who've put that product on there. So I think on this one we need to be, this is where there, I think we're going to have to be much clearer and tougher, if you will, with China, and saying, we are going to call it out if we believe that these are not fair, right? And where they are, and we have to have a faster mechanism to be able to deal with it. Dealing with these non-tariff issues, whether it be the phytosanitary, measures or issues that are raised. And Fred Gorell, I think, has been doing some terrific work on that, which is to speed up the investigation and the response and require the country, whether it be China or others, to deal with the issues faster and to call it out if we think it's wrong. I think it's also about building relationships. We need to have more, for example, of the of the take the case obviously of China, the Chinese buyers and customs officials and inspectors to spend time in our country to understand how it works. This is part of the people to people relationships. I think, again, what I found is when we've had some of these barriers, where we're able to work it out faster is if this person has some relationship to Canada. And often it's an educational relationship. They've actually gone to university or they've done training. And that we need to just, I think we have to continue to do that as leaders in food in the world. I think we should be bringing in people from around the world, particularly again from Asia, to see how we do it, have them participate in our processes to ensure here's how we have high standards and so forth, because those relationships matter when there's then a bottleneck that's there, and then we can help sort it. I think the other element about this is we're just gonna we're in a world of a new globalization. I don't think globalization is going away. I just think it's going to be different. And we were probably at peak globalization just before the great financial crisis in 2008 in terms of just the amount of trade of goods and services as a percentage of GDP. That was the peak. So it's actually been dropping, not a lot, been dropping for over sort of a 12-year period. But it's not going to go away. But I think it's going to become more regional. I think it's going to become more of I think countries are going to use it more as a weapon, if you will. I think that they call it, we need to look to the pre-World War II period where they called it power trading, where you had countries that were using trade to influence. And we're seeing this between China and Australia right now. That's where this power trading is going on. And I think we just need to be not naive about it and say, okay, China's going to be an important market. How do we work together to say we're not going to put up with some of these non-tariff barriers? How do we work together and make it clear and leverage our power, if you will, to be able to do it? Because we can't have them picking off one if I might say, grain versus another, which they can be very good at doing. Is there a way for us to think about bundling what we do in some sort of a broader food security arrangement? But I'm digressing from your question. I think I worry about the I'm sort of bucketing the phytosanitary measures in the kind of the non-tariff related areas. That's where I think we're going to see more action. And therefore there's ways we can deal with it with relationships, with thinking about how we bundle all of our products, especially on the agri-food side, together, and build these deeper relationships with the people on the Chinese side, with our standard setters, and so forth in the industry.
Thanks. I appreciate your insights on that. As we look to expand trade opportunities and to diversify around the world, even deals that don't include Canada, for example, can have an impact on our ability to access those markets. Take, for example, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. This is an agreement where you see 15 Asian Pacific countries, which represent collectively about 30% of the global GDP, making it the largest trading bloc in history. What effect could this agreement have on Canada's ability to access Asian markets and more generally trade flows and geopolitics in the region?
Well, I think RCEP it's a very big deal, as you said, in terms of just the scale of it, 30% of trade and so forth. And again, not only 30% today, again, with this region growing so quickly, even higher over time. I actually think we're going to benefit from that, in the sense that we have trade agreements with some of the key players in RCEP, and we trade with some of those countries in a pretty significant way. So I think what's critical is we be part of the supply chains. We have to me, this is all about supply chains, and how we get integrated into the supply chains that are part of RCEP is a way for us to be in it. So I actually see that there's positive elements to it. I think our involvement, obviously, in CPTPP is a very important element in this, and you've got some of the members of RCEP, notably China, now want to be, or at least are indicating they want to be part of the CPTPP. So I think that we need to make sure, though, that we do have more trade agreements in the region, in Asia. We're punching above our weight as a country globally, in terms of, I think we're the only G7 that has a free trade agreement with all the other G7 players, or something like that. But we need to be much more aggressive on the Asian side. So this ASEAN trade agreement discussion that's going on. There's one with India. It's been a long process. It's not moving as fast as we want, but I think we've got to be doing that. There's discussions with Indonesia. It's very important that we be in the mix on this, to be able to have access. And then in the meantime, let's just make sure we're in the supply chains that are in RCEP, and we can be.
Great. You've been very generous with your time. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Good. Because I want to touch on China a little more. You've talked a bit about some of this, but it's soon to be the world's largest economy. And as you've stated already, it's a market on which we rely heavily. What should Canadian agriculture understand, in your view, about the long-term Chinese demand for food?
Well, I think that, at the core of this, massive global increase in demand for food, because it's a combination of population growth, but also, more importantly, middle class growth. At the core, if we were sort of to stack up what the drivers of that are, and I said we're talking about a 50% increase over a sort of a 40-year period. The core of that is China, the Chinese middle class. Then it would be India after that. But the urbanization and the underlying growth of China is a key part. So you've got, they're going to be importing, I think it's in the order of $22 trillion worth of goods over the next 10 years as they grow. And food, they are the largest food purchaser. And I think they're they obviously have a big domestic industry that they're trying to drive. And that's important for them from a food security point of view. But they are just right down, in the middle of the target, if you will, about where we need to be on growth. There's no question that China is at the center of the overall global increase in food demand, high quality food demand, vegetable-based proteins, whatever the category, they are core. Think core to it. Think at minimum 30% of where it is. That's the kind of numbers we need to see because of, again, that growing middle class. And that again, it's the opportunity is not just the exports. I think we also have to look at what we do domestically in China. So I'm quite excited by some of the Canadian brands on the consumer side. If you think about Tim Hortons, right, and where Tim Hortons is just growing like gangbusters. And the thing that honestly surprised me is I go to quite a number of their openings, and they're not like the 100th one I went to the 148th opening. There were lineups of people outside the store, including tents, because people stayed overnight because they wanted to be there. These are Chinese consumers. They're not, there's not Canadians that are kind of buying. These are Chinese that are there, and they are so Canadian. It makes me a bit embarrassed because the cups are red and white with maple leaves. The staff are wearing lumberjack shirts. It's kitsch, but it is there, and that's a brand, right? Arc'teryx mentioned, which is the sports brand from North Vancouver. It's now owned by a Chinese private equity firm. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know it was a Canadian brand. Shame on me. Yeah, shame on me. I didn't know that. It's a world-class mountaineering brand. But the owners wanted, because they asked the embassy, they said, could you come for the big opening of our largest store in the world? It's in Shanghai. So I went and I said, it's nice you're asking me to come, given the bilateral. And I said, well, this is a Canadian brand. And we bought this brand because it's Canadian. And so you go into the store and it's like you're being in North Vancouver. They're literally in the store is a wooden hut that you can get rained on, right? And you wear the Gore-Tex and they do. So I actually think there's a very big opportunity for Canadian ag food players to participate in the domestic market. McCain's on the potato side does that. They are a major supplier of French fries, obviously, to their suppliers there, but it's domestic. They're growing and harvesting potatoes in China, and I think there's opportunities to do that in pork. I think there's opportunities for us to do that in all sorts of areas as it relates to the technology of grain growing. If I might say that, that's a broad. I think there's so many value-added elements to being able to do that right that we could provide in that market. So it's not just an export demand; it's a domestic consumer market that's changing quickly, and we are well positioned if we want to capture it to play a bigger role on all sorts of different aspects of it. So that's where I think it's very much in the core.
What impact do you think this is going to have with respect to China? And they're seeking to increase domestic production and take advantage of investments in agribusiness through their Belts and Roads initiative. What impact do you think that's going to have on Canadian exports to China?
Yeah, I think there's two important points you're making in that, right? I think one is this domestic capability. This is again on food security. They're very nervous about ever having to rely on the outside world for everything. That you see that in energy, in oil, natural gas, and so forth. They don't want to rely on one supplier, if you will, because they worry about security, resilience. And so that I think we just need to be careful. This is again about back to our own resilience. Let's not put all our eggs in one basket, certainly with one buyer. We have to think about the region of within China, regions in China, but more broadly. So that's one aspect that we need to be careful or thoughtful about in it. But I also think that there are the opportunity for us to play a role in helping build a more robust domestic agriculture, agri-food business is there. And again, it can be our technology, it can be our management techniques. There's a desire for that. If you think again, I don't just in a different category, but on with the African swine flu, this is a huge issue for them, given the importance of that product and how it works. But if you also think about fish, I think about the importance of many of the the importance of canola in the with fish, the domestic market in fish. There's a lot of areas we could, I think, play more partnership roles with some of the key domestic players to make them even more successful and high quality. One other aspect you raised was the Belt Road initiative, and I think we have to look at that seriously, because that's going to add more competition. I mean, one area that I worry more for us about in Canada in terms of competition is not so much the United States, I clearly do, and Brazil and Argentina, some of the standard players, let's say on the grain side. With Belt Road, you're going to see more of the Central Asian countries coming into the system. So you've got Kazakhstan, you've got Belarus, you've got Pakistan, where they're trying to create the domestic, ag industry there to supply China. So that's going to provide some pressure on us. I think we just have to recognize that that's a factor in it. But again, I think we have to think globally and say, we've got Canada, which is wonderful. People would just, die to have a tiny piece of what we've got. But I also think we should be, if you don't mind, being greedy and saying, well, let's also think about how we participate in some of these other markets, because we want the Canadian, I'm keen we have the Canadian shareholder interest even in these other markets. And I think there's a way for us to play a role. One again, just a minor example, and you may think I'm crazy. I've been spending some time with the African ambassadors who are very impressive people. Ag food is obviously an area they're interested in. China's interested in them because of that. If you think about Ethiopia, Tanzania. And what's interesting is when in talking with them, what they're saying is, we see China as a very important market for us on the agri-food side. But what they're also saying is we would love to have Canadian players in our countries that are working with us, like Canadian owners of companies that are doing things with us. And again, obviously we've got to think about our domestic market and unleashing the huge potential we have there. But it also doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about these other places, whether they happen to be linked to the Belt and Road or in Africa, where we're playing a role. There's sort of Canadian ownership or involvement in that, because I'm keen we be global. By being Canadian doesn't just mean it has to come from Canada. I'm talking about it's Canadian ownership and it's Canadian management and leadership and that element. I know that's a bit sort of out there perhaps, but I think it's just, again, given this demand for food, and there's no way any one country can be able to do it. It's going to be a collective effort. Let's own as much of that value chain as we possibly can.
I like that. It's very visionary, right? And that's the purpose of the conversation. So I appreciate that insight. Thank you. Before I ask you a closing question, I want one final question on China, but I want to come back to something you said earlier too, in terms of a role for associations and industry. Yeah. So, many have said that despite international trade rules, China is going to do what China wants to do, and it's going to impose measures to restrict trade as it sees fit. I doubt the Chinese government may agree with that assessment, but certainly, that's our Canadian producers struggle to understand the legitimacy of some of the technical barriers that we have faced. What's your vision for securing access to the Chinese market for Canadian farmers? And what do you think the role for government, the Canadian government, or for industry, and by industry I include our association and our members, in driving that and achieving that?
I think actually industry and associations are absolutely critical. And Erin, I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast. It is essential because clearly government plays a role, and that's often trying to get market access or deal with these issues, particularly non-tariff related issues and things like that, challenges that occur, dealing with customs and so forth. But I think, again, I go back to these the relationships, the importance of the personal relationships over time, especially in a place like China, but I would argue it's in other parts of Asia, is essential to getting things done. And what I always say, it's a very, simplistic thing, is that in China, you typically have to become friends before you do business together. In North America, I think when you do business together, you often become friends, right? It's a way, and it's getting to know people. And I think associations are really important for a number of different dimensions. One is actually to ensure that people on both sides understand that there are people. These are people. This isn't China, Canada. These are individual farmers, right, that have a relationship. And by the way, on the Chinese side, these are individual consumers. These are individual retailers that are buying our product. They're entrepreneurs. And we tend to, I think, if we don't have those personal connections, we can demonize each other. And so I think associations can play a very important role in helping people relate to each other. It provides a forum for, I think, Chinese buyers to be able to understand the Canadian producers and what they're like. They would love the desire to come and visit Canada, to go see where the product is grown, what it looks like, is huge. It is huge. And I was in one of the, Qingdao, the brewery that buys a lot of our malt barley, right? Who think, even again with a tough bilateral situation, they love the quality of our product. They like the people they deal with, but it's the personal connections they have. They did do trips before COVID and felt they have a connection. And I think associations are critical in being able to build those people to people ties. They're also, I found, I found this with the meat council, even when we had the restrictions on pork, the fact that they would still come and visit and connect, even though there was a blocking that was going on, that built a relationship, if you will, with people in China, where there was, it's not about countries. Again, it gets down to the people side. I think there's more we can do on education. How, I think, could we, should we be having scholarships for both for Canadian farm like producers? I've always thought, why don't we have a Rhodes Scholarship for Canadian farmers? And part of it is you spend time in a critical market. The Australians have done this, right? And we pick, and these are just, it could, people, could be younger people. They get to spend, a year just in China, in a systematic way, looking around the country, building relationships with, and I think an association is the right body to kind of promote that, the talent to come in, that we want to forge these relationships. And we may only see the benefit of that in 10 years or 15 years, but these are things that are important. And I think, again, the association is also just it's a very important collective strength to be able to help with getting access, to make sure that issues are being dealt with, to put pressure on all of us that we achieve these ambitions that we're saying, and call it out and say, what we're not moving fast enough. Like you're asking me, what's our scorecard? Where are we? I think that's the collective group that is going to put it forward. We have to have the private sector, in my view, the driver's seat. And I think associations are the ultimate way of bringing the private sector together to be able to drive focus, to be able to build these relationships, short and long term, to be able to communicate also to Canadians, right, about the importance of what's happening. One thing I worry about is again, we're in a sort of a 1 or 0 world. Either people are good or bad. There's and we've got to explain the nuances about how this works. So I could go on, but I think they're absolutely critical. There's many facets of it, and I think we should crank up the volume, I think, on what associations are doing, both in China, but also in Canada, in Asia, but also in Canada, because they're key. You guys are key.
Duly noted. Thank you. As we close what has been an excellent conversation, perhaps you could leave us with a couple of reasons to feel optimistic about Canada's economic future.
Well, I'm very optimistic. I mean, again, because we have all the ingredients, right? And we're talking here about grains. We're talking about agri-food. We're talking in many other dimensions too, technology. But if you look at the this transition that the world is going through. And it's not just the pandemic, which is terrible and so forth, but there's fundamental changes that are going on in terms of the rise or re-rise of Asia as an economic power. There's technology shifts we're in the early stages of. There's a aging population like we've never seen before. These are big forces. What I call them, again, they're tailwinds so they could be headwinds for others. A lot of those forces are actually tailwinds for Canada. We're, geographically extremely well positioned, with North America and the Pacific. And towards Europe. We are a technology leader in the world. We have to continue to do more on the R&D to stay there, but we're a well-educated, highly skilled group. We are multicultural. I mean, this is the other part that you really, I think, only recognize it when you're outside of the country, but just how global we are, our communities. We're a land of immigrants, and that is highly, highly, highly regarded in other parts of the world. So we've got the hard power, or hard ingredients, and we've got the soft ingredients on all these dimensions. I could go on. I could go on it. And what we've got to do is be more ambitious. We've got, what I always say, that's the question is, imagine if Singapore owned us. What would they do? They would go crazy. They've got nothing. They've got a piece of dirt in an important part, a small piece of dirt, and they've just taken whatever they can. Or I think about South Korea. What would they do if they own? Look at what the Netherlands has done with 4% of Ontario's landmass, right, and where they are. So what I think the beauty is we've got all the assets, and I'm not saying we don't have challenges too and so forth. We do have, it's like aging population, aging workforce. The thing there, we've got some of the leading thinking in the world on aging, believe it or not, like on dementia and Alzheimer's. Literally, some of the best work in the world that's going on is in Canada. It's in Toronto, Montreal, and actually Winnipeg. So we've got all the ingredients that are really seriously there to be able to do this, and so it's our century coming up. This is our century. So what we've got to do is be aggressive. I think we have to be much more aggressive and high ambition. Like we have this, therefore we should own it. I think even in clean tech, I just see these. There are a lot of them are BC companies. There are others, and what they're doing in China, because it will be the largest clean tech market in the world. I know we're talking grain growers. So I'm just saying there's another segment that they want our tech. It's the technology. It's not trying to steal our technology. It's just the capabilities we have, whether it be related to the electric vehicles or whatever. And so we just have to make sure that we are aggressive in terms of how we own it and benefit from it. And that sounds selfish a bit, but we have to do that, and we have to act like we want to be dominant, and that's what I think we do. And again, agri-food, grain, that's a centerpiece of that. So I just hope we set a high enough ambition. And one of the things I always question is maybe we should have the odd Singaporean or South Korean in meetings with us, almost to just be in the meeting and say, would they, they might 5X what we think is good just on the ambition. And I think we should unleash some of that and go after it. But I really do feel like this is our century. And we've got the connections, we've got the people, we've got the research, we've got, a lot of, but we just, let's not get in our own way, and let's get it.
I love that. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for taking time with us to share your vision for Canada's agriculture sector and beyond. It has certainly been an honor and a privilege to host you on our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much again, Erin. I've loved talking with you.
Excellent. And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Fireside Chats with Erin. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with another special guest. In the meantime, if you want to stay up to date with all things GGC, please follow us on Twitter @Grain Growers or on Instagram @Canada's Grain Growers. Until then.